are you talking about? Film's the greatest educational medium the world has ever known.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to Teenage Golden Age, a podcast where we talk about old Hollywood movies from the perspective of the next generation. Today, I am so excited because we are bringing back Simone, our producer on the podcast, for a very special reason. She recently wrote a book, Old Films, Young Eyes, a teenage take on Hollywood's golden age. And today, she's on the podcast and we're going to interview her all about her new book. This is an incredible book, and it's almost like an extension of our podcast. And it presents an eye-opening tour of how old movies foreshadowed, influenced, and continue to shape popular culture in surprising ways. And yeah, I just think it's a great way to kind of dive into the golden age of Hollywood world and learn about classic films from a new perspective. And it really answers the question, why should we watch classic films? Why watch old movies? What insight can we gain from them? So it's an incredible book, and it comes out this November on November 17th. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon. Before we get started, though, please make sure to rate and review us if you enjoy our podcast because it helps grow our audience and help more people hear about old movies. Additionally, make sure to follow us at Teenage Golden Age, where we share movie clips, podcast clips, reminders about when new episodes come out, and more. Yeah, so I'm so excited to be back with Simone. Wrote this amazing new book that's like kind of an extension of our podcast. But to start our first question, I thought this was proper because we used to begin all of our interviews with this question, but I haven't asked this question in a while. So how did you first discover classic movies and why do you watch them?
Well, I'm Simone, and I helped Eliana start this podcast back about 2.5 years ago. And I started watching classic movies because of you and because your passion for them really just pulled me into them. And now I am also a semi-expert, and I just got pulled in by your love of them and your recommendations, and the podcast really brought me to it.
Yeah, so cool. And I remember when you first watched your very first classic film. I forget
Funny,
what movie was it?
funny face. I
Funny
was in Dog
Face.
Pepper phase for a bit.
Mm,
You want
yeah. Yeah, best way to start. And yeah, how did the idea for this book first come to you, and why did you feel like it was important to write it?
So when I was writing some scripts, I think a couple years ago, we started talking about, oh, sometime in the distant future, maybe there'll be a book of the podcast. And then, my mom is an author, so I've grown up around her writing book proposals. And so I thought it wouldn't hurt to write a book proposal. So I worked on that all of last year, and I started sending it into publishers, and one of them accepted it. And the book radically changed, I think, from inception to while I was writing it. I think it became more about teenagers and less about movies. And I learned a lot more. I was very naive at the beginning. I didn't know that much, but now I feel like I've done all the research. Not all of it, some.
That's so cool. And yeah, what sets a teenage perspective apart when looking at classic Hollywood? And how does your viewpoint as a teenager offer something fresh or unique in understanding these films?
Yeah, well, there's so many perspectives that aren't teenagers on classic movies. Like when we started, that was our big takeaway from our podcast, was that we want it to be about teens and our perspective, because all the podcasts that I was listening to before we started were like old men talking about them. And so we need new perspectives on everything. And I think classic films can very much be recontextualized into today's pop culture. And so I think that a lot of that has to do with teenagers.
Yeah, for sure. And I love how just from reading the book, I can really hear your own voice talking about these films. And I just think the world needs like the next generation to take on these historic films and history and bring them alive. Yeah. And how did you curate and choose the films and topics to feature in your book? Because you have an amazing selection, and I feel like I've never seen some of the topics that you talk about in other books. And I think it's just a great selection and a great way to start learning about classic films.
I read a lot of books about classic movies, and I thought, none of these tell us why I need to know about this. None of these tell us why I need to know as a person in today. Like, this is just the past. I don't need to know about it. So the criteria for chapters was really, how can I bring this to now, right? How is this modern? How does this matter at all today? So if it were something like Casablanca, I tried to write a chapter about like those kind of films, and I just couldn't find my way into bringing it to today. Just couldn't do that. So I had to just omit that. And that was the real point of this book, was to bring it to today, because all of the books didn't have that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about these old films being important in today in our society. So, in what ways did you want to show the impact of Hollywood's golden age on modern filmmaking and its importance in history today?
So I really wanted to start the book, first of all, with that chapter, how classic movies are reflected in today's popular culture. Because I didn't want to dive right into it and have the teenage readers be like, "Ugh, I don't care. Why did my grandma buy me this book?" Right? So it has to be like, okay, Taylor Swift. Let's draw them in with Taylor Swift. Let's draw them in with Kim Kardashian, and then let's get into the real point, right? Because that's why people read things, because they like, those people who are drawing in the headlines and, all the popular TikTok stuff. So I had to make sure that was the first thing I did.
Yeah, that's a great way to start. That's really, really interesting. And yeah, what was the process like researching the films, the movements, the actors, the genres that you talk about in your book, as well as just the process of interviewing the various authors and writers you quoted in your book?
Yeah, so I wrote this book over 3 months, which is in regular publishing,
Insane.
it's not allowed. So I basically took off school, I took off all my regular responsibilities, and I just wrote like 8 hours a day. And what really helped when I was writing it was the online blogs, Wikipedia, stuff like that. Stuff where I could get the facts and then interpret them by myself. So I got a lot of books, I got a lot of book recommendations, and I would quote those and reach out to the authors and interview them, ask them specific questions that I really wanted to know. Email interviews, and then once I got those authors that I already knew, they gave me more recommendations for people to talk to, and my world sort of opened up as I was writing it, and I learned and learned more. And you know how on Wikipedia you can click on an article and it'll lead you to another article and another article? It was sort of like that.
That's so cool. And also, I wanted to hear more about kind of your list at the end of your book about the movies you recommend to teenagers. Like, how did you curate that? And also that list of all like the books and the sources and the YouTube videos that you would recommend to people.
Well, I did ask you YouTube what YouTubers, because I didn't know that much about YouTubers about classic Hollywood, but I did read a lot of books during that time. And so I basically just listed all the books I'd read over the last 2 years, and that was what that was. And then also I used podcasts as to learn about classic movies. So I basically just put all the sources that I used. And then for the films, that was really hard because I didn't want people saying, "Oh, why didn't you do Citizen Kane? Why didn't you put Casablanca?" So I was just like, these are my favorite movies. You could find yours. Everybody has their different. Nobody's gonna have the same list of their favorite classic films. So some of the films that I put down, like 30 Day Princess, were very obscure and nobody knows about them. And I don't know if anybody else enjoyed them as much as I did, but it doesn't matter because I just wanted to show how everybody can have different opinions on movies, and that's kind of the point.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And yeah, what advice would you give to teenagers who want to start writing a book like you did? And yeah, any motivational advice?
Yeah, I think just ask around, ask for what you want. That's my first thing. Because if you ask, you'll probably get a no, but also sometimes you get a yes, and the yes is worth it. And then as for writing, I think you have to write for yourself. You have to write because you want to. You have to write from some internal motivation. And then you have to accept that it's okay if you don't want to write for a little bit. The way I work is I have to push myself really hard and get through a lot of writing, 10,000 words or so, and then I stop for a little while and then I keep going. So you have to kind of accept that that's how it works. And you also have to accept that you will get so sick of whatever you're writing about. You will hate it. So you just have to remember that that's just how it's going to go with everything. No, that other book you're thinking about writing, you will also get sick of that. So just keep going.
Yeah, I love that. Do you feel like you kind of not gotten sick of classic movies, but sometimes now like you kind of associate them with writing the book, and so it's less of a leisure thing, more of like
In a good way.
in a good way.
The book was really rough at times because I was like, my whole life is this book, my whole life. And then I'd be like, but I hate it. I love it, but I hate it. So it was a very interesting emotional experience for sure. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, cool. And to conclude our interview, why should teenagers read Old Films, Young Eyes, a teenage take on Hollywood's golden age?
You should read it because it helps you understand the world around you.
Unfortunately, that is the end of this episode, but thank you so much to Simone for coming on. It's just so, so cool that she was able to write this entire book in 3 months. And I think it's just an incredible feat that she's only 15 now, I think. Yeah, and she's written an entire book, and I think it's so inspirational and so cool how she wanted to kind of continue this message that we preach on our podcast and introduce the younger generation to old movies and bring this history alive. So I think you guys should all definitely make sure to purchase the book and pre-order it now because it comes out November 17th. And yeah, I hope you enjoy. If you guys have any questions or comments, definitely make sure to email us at teenagegoldenage@gmail.com. That's teenagegoldenage@gmail.com. See you in our next episode. Bye.